searching history for buried classics. This is Lost Treasures of Gaming.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Lost Treasures of Gaming. We are still here. We are still behind the scenes working to get guests for you to listen to. But we are back, and I am Sean Evans, otherwise known as Zion Tane.
And I am Sid Bolton, Sid Bolton on Twitter, and of course I am your gaming archaeologist finding lost treasures for you each week, and you can find me on Xbox as Dirk the Daring.
Awesome. So this week's Lost Treasure, we're actually going to be talking about a game called Wizard from the Commodore 64, a game I personally did not hear of, but has a very distinct connection to a game I did love, which is Jumpman Jr., in the fact that they're very similar games. But this is a bit of a twist on our interview this week, Sid, is it not?
It is. You know, normally we try and talk to someone directly connected with the game, whether it's someone who is a developer or someone who, you know, had something to do with the game, maybe related to somebody who worked on the game, a sound designer, a level editor, something, some kind of connection. But in this case, we're actually talking to someone who had no involvement with the game other than the fact that they were a huge fan of the game, and that fandom actually led to them being involved in the gaming industry, and that's a pretty interesting story as far as I'm concerned.
It is, and of course we're going to be talking tonight with Jason Canam, who was formerly of Drinkbox Studios, the studio behind the popular Guacamelee, and who has now gone off to start his own company called Household Games, which we'll hear more of later this year. But what a great conversation we're going to have with him. We're going to learn how Wizard affected him at a young life, and then literally and figuratively led into a career in game development, which is a fascinating story. So without further ado, let's go talk to Jason. Jason, thanks for joining Lost Treasures of Gaming. It's been a couple of weeks since we had a show, so thank you for saving us.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me on. Absolutely. Glad to be here.
So we have you on this week. Now, normally we have our guest is a developer of the Lost Treasure that we did this week. And of course, this week being Wizard from the Commodore 64. But you are not the developer for Wizard, so we're kind of taking a twist on this show. In your terms, why don't you tell us why we're talking to you tonight?
Yes, absolutely, gladly. Now, you know, I know regularly on the show, guys, you always start off, or quite often start off asking someone, you know, how they got in the industry, how did they start, kind of what their influences were. And for me, Wizard is the single most influential game that I've played that got me into creating games, that inspired me to want to pursue it as a passion and as a job. And really, even at a very young age, even outside of game development itself, just got me to think creatively and about being a creator, and kind of put that creative mindset in my tiny little young brain when I originally had played it.
So how old were you when you played Wizard for the first time?
4 years old.
Wow. Okay.
Wow.
And it was my introduction to computers, and it was my introduction to creating games as well.
That's awesome. Now, did you play? I mean, that game is very much similar. A lot of people say it's very similar to Jumpman, which was actually a favorite of mine. Did you also play Jumpman at the time, or was Wizard like your go-to game at that time?
No, it just so happened that when I was very young, when I was introduced to the Commodore 64, my family had also amassed quite a large library of games, and Jumpman was also one of them as well. Jumpman and Jumpman Jr.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Love playing those, but I mean, absolutely also very important in cementing my love of platformers.
Yeah. Which one did you prefer? Like you said, Wizard had a big effect on you. Was that like the game that said, when you played that and you're like, I gotta do this?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it is the single most. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Now, how into the Wizard were you? Did you like know all the facts about it at the time? Were you like sort of like that Wizard guru?
I guess as much as you could be, of course. There wasn't the internet at the time. I love digging deep into it. And like I said, it was very early for me for teaching me about creating, and was also very important in kind of teaching me to use computers. Now, of course, I know we're going to get into it eventually, but one of my favorite things is that it let you construct your own levels with it.
Yes, that's right.
And even at a very young age, I had figured out how to bend the rules it gave you to kind of create new things,
nice.
And that was super important to me. Very early on, I kind of figured out, because it gave you a big manual, and the manual had all the instructions, like, if you want to put monsters in your level, they would always say, follow these steps. You would set like the monster AI type, the monster sprite, how it looked. And even at a very young age, I was like, wait, what if you mix those numbers up? What if I tell it to be the AI of a bat, but make it look like a knight? And you could create a flying knight. So it would just use the knight image, but give it the abilities of the bat. So you'd have a flying knight. And so I instantly was like, I get this. I can create my own world with my own rules. And that's kind of part of why it was totally mind-blowing for me.
Now I got to ask, back then when you were a fan of a game, some people would write to the author of the game. Did you ever do that?
I did not, as a matter of fact. No, I didn't. And I guess that came from just being so young. I was still at that stage where I didn't quite have the concepts that people made this. So I was still too young to have aspirations of being a game developer, because it hadn't even dawned on me, like, who creates these games, who makes them. So I never really, I didn't actually. And by the time I was old enough, it was unfortunately too late.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, this game actually was released in kind of a different couple of ways. Like, first of all, there was the original Wizard that came out, and then there was no sort of construction set with that, and then there was an expansion called the Wizard Expansion Set, which was released separately. And then when Electronic Arts came into the picture, they actually picked up the code, and then they released a version called the Ultimate Wizard, which included the construction set and an additional 50 levels in the game, some of which were actually designed by Paul Reich III, who actually is from Skylanders, one of the creators of the original Skylanders. So would you say you probably played the Ultimate Wizard version, or do you remember specifically?
I do remember specifically, and this is mostly stuff I found out just in the past 4 or 5 years, but I do know it was not the Ultimate Wizard version.
Ah.
And I've actually been doing some research recently. I've been doing it for the past couple of years. A couple years ago, actually a few years ago now, in 2012, was, if I'm correct, was the 30th anniversary of the Commodore 64.
Yes.
Which was also my 30th birthday. So they kind of synced up really,
Nice.
really well. So I'm as old as the Commodore 64.
Commodore 64. That's should be the new tagline.
So
Yeah.
exactly. So that'll always be an important part of me. And so I wrote a blog post about my favorite Commodore 64 games. I was like, I should write a blog post about Wizard. Absolutely. Talk about how important it is to me. And so I did a bunch of research, and that's when I learned about the version differences and the Ultimate Wizard version. And it was definitely before that. And in doing some of my research, I learned how they had actually improved the level design, the level creation tools. Because there were some things that were in the original set of levels that you simply couldn't do in the construction kit they gave you. And that, even though I could figure out that I could rewire monsters to behave differently, and I kind of felt good about doing that, there were little tricks they put in the levels, like picking up a chalice off the ground makes a wall disappear. And I spent so much time trying to figure out how I could cause that to happen, but that's what they added in the Ultimate Edition.
Oh,
was the
wow.
ability to do that, and I feel like I missed out. I'm like, oh, the levels I could have made if I would have had that.
Now, would you ever go back and make some new levels? Like maybe release them sort of out into the world as the Jason special edition, maybe for the 35th anniversary of the Commodore 64?
That is a very good idea. I would love to do that. It is actually, to this day, it's probably my favorite level editing suite that's ever been included in a game. Like, even more so than using like Doom and Duke Nukem build levels, which I've also used a ton of. The name of my blog is I Heart Level Editors.
Oh, nice.
And I always reference that using kind of, and Wizard is the absolute beginning of it, the genesis of it, but throughout my entire young life, using level editors and the creation tools that come packaged in with games have always been my favorite thing, and they're really building on those over several decades is kind of how I got my start.
So you originally said that Wizard was the game that really got you interested in game development, which is where you are now.
Yes.
You were with Drinkbox Studios, and now you've started your own studio, is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
And what's the name of your new studio?
So the name of the studio is Household Games.
Household Games. Of course, most people know Drinkbox Studios from Guacamelee.
Yes.
But now, tell me, like, how has Wizard affected the games you've created? Now that, I mean, you said that is the game that you go back to. It's your favorite level editor. You're always, it's your ultimate game, basically, right?
Yes.
So how does that affect the games you create today?
Oh, absolutely. That's a great question. Just from earlier when I explained about how I quickly learned that you could take the rules of a game and bend them to your will, and that's kind of what made you a creator. That has translated into exactly the processes that I use in game development. And for a game like Guacamelee, my role in that game was working as a level designer. And my job was to use the studio's level design tool, which is really just a version of the Wizard level editor on steroids. It's just a much more amped up version of it. But all of the same methodologies, all of the same kind of way of thinking is just how I apply it. And that's how I build levels. And it's just a matter of what are the rules of the world, and then how can you kind of bend them to your will. And that applies to much more recently, absolutely. I think where now we've reached the peak of this is with the most recently released Super Mario Maker.
Oh yeah,
that's where that's kind of where it's really come to a head. But the way I build levels, and I really like the way Mario Maker has done it, and like I said, Wizard, and even like the tools I use that I've worked professionally, is what are the rules of the world, and how can you combine things to make more interesting things happen. So you have the rules of the world, like ground you can walk on and spikes that damage you. And then you have things that move. And then I just ask myself, well, what if I just attach spikes to this thing that moves? Or I'm going to take this thing you normally talk to and make it rotate. Or like, why can't a door be upside down? And that's what's the most fun with specifically level design for me.
And that's what you got from growing up with the Wizard.
Exactly, and then like I said, that's so rooted in just playing that game and learning those early lessons.
Well, I knew the game was important to you because when you actually came out to the Personal Computer Museum, and I remember pretty much the first thing you said to me was, "Do you have the Wizard? Is that here amongst the games that we have?" So, and I mean, really, that's one of the reasons we're talking to you today. I just realized how passionate you were about that game, and it's, I think you're very fortunate that you can sort of trace back your love for gaming and essentially the career path that it led it to with one specific game. I know for me there was so many, and I'm actually in the process of sort of trying to go back and identify the first video games that I played and how they influenced me. And I think it's a good exercise for people that have been involved in gaming for as long as we have. This includes you too, Sean, to go back and sort of deconstruct exactly, what games we played, what made them fun, why, because obviously for us to be as involved in whatever capacity, as a game player, as a game developer, as a programmer, as anything involved in games, there had to have been something in those first experiences that were positive enough to keep you in it and keep you interested. Otherwise, you would have played a game and then moved on to some other kind of hobby. So I think it's an interesting exercise for people to go back and look at what about certain games made them fun for you. And in your case, I think had the Wizard, when you look at the two games, like obviously financially and commercially, Jumpman was more successful than the Wizard game. But for you, I think it was that construction set aspect of it that made all the difference, right? I mean, that's really what triggered something in you that has now led into your full-time career.
Exactly, absolutely. And I mean, it was definitely, that's what gave it that edge. But ultimately, I do think it was a stronger game as well.
Yeah, and I think it gets overlooked a lot. I think, and that's one of the great things about the show is that we do find lost treasures for people to go and try, because if you did love Jumpman and you like that kind of game, you're definitely going to see the similarities. I mean, let's face it, the death animations, like, they can say they were coincidental all they want, but that's clearly a copy. But that's okay. But
well,
yeah,
I mean, the wizard himself even looks like Jumpman with a robe.
Yeah,
exactly. But
that's true. You're right. His head is just 4 white pixels.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly. I mean, that's true with the resolution back then. Though all the characters look the same.
That's true.
That's true.
But yeah, really, I mean, a stick figure is a stick figure, right? But yeah, I think there were some other things. Do you want to talk a little bit about the differences in the gameplay that, as you remember them, between Jumpman and the Wizard? Like, I know there was with the keys, and you mentioned the doors and things like that. Do you want to just touch on that a little bit?
Absolutely, yeah. Now, so Wizard, it was single screen levels. Kind of single screen obstacle courses that were presented, same way as kind of Jumpman. Each one would have a kind of a unique mechanic presented to them, kind of same thing as Jumpman. But whereas, of course, Jumpman had you collect all of the bombs, the little cherries in the level, Wizard just had you with the singular grab the key and take it to the keyhole tile. And along the way, any treasures you picked up would simply be bonus points. But one of the differences, the big difference for me, and this is also really important to me about the game, a little subtle thing, in terms of presentation, I know Jumpman always kind of, it would present the level to you, it would just show it on screen, it would tell you the title of the level, which would always be a hint as to what you're going to be doing in the level. But Wizard, every time a level loads, it would dynamically construct the level in front of your eyes. And it always did it piece by piece. It would always build the walls first, then the floors, then the ladders, then the ropes, and then populate the treasures in one by one. And each one of those actions was accompanied by like a musical note. So the soundtrack of the level was kind of how it came together and how it built together. Yeah. There was like flutes that represented the ropes, like strings, kind of like a really lo-fi violin would be the ladders. So every level had its own little like tune it would play as it would build itself in front of you. And that was really important to me because it factored into how I'd build the level. Because you would build the level and you would have a little like blank corner in the top right of the screen. Like, oh, I'm not using that for anything. But I figured out that I could just put the right combination of little ladder segments and rope segments that kind of looked ugly and had no purpose, but they would play the right little set of notes that I wanted it to.
That's cool.
And that was kind of a little touch that I was like, that's amazing. And as I was describing it just right now, that reminded me of that's kind of been carried forward into Super Mario Maker. Because if you've played that, as you drop down like little bricks into the level or question blocks, it plays a little musical note for each one you drop. And as you kind of drag the stylus back and forth, dropping in bricks, it plays music one note at a time.
Wow. So you make your own music that way.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And then, of course, Wizard gave you a little bit more of an active role, whereas Jumpman was pure platformer.
Yes.
Because that's all the character could do was jump.
So
and it was really about maneuverability.
You heart level designers.
Yeah.
What other level designers did you grow up loving? Because the Commodore 64 had several. I mean, one of my favorites, Mr. Robot and his Robot Factory, had level design. Of course, there was the Racing Destruction set, where you could build your own levels. What other games did you play that had level designers?
Absolutely. There was Pinball Construction set, which lets you build your own virtual pinball tables, which was really, really great.
Man, that would be popular today.
Yeah. I would love to see really, a high-res, high-fidelity custom pinball kit.
And imagine that with a proper physics engine and everything like that really wouldn't exist at the time with a 1 megahertz computer. I mean, the physics in that, actually, the fact that they worked as well as they did was pretty amazing.
Yeah, I'm thinking Pinball Effects level designer. I mean, come on.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Well, they must have a tool. I mean, with all these levels they make, they must have a tool.
Oh,
but
they have to, for sure.
Must just not be consumer ready.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a big job to take, because I know places I've worked, the question has always come up like, oh, should we create a community level tool? And the amount of work to get your in-house tools ready for people to use is almost the production time of making a whole game in itself.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just not worth it. But in this frantic search for level editors and seeking out games that had that kind of content, that led me to another famous Lost Treasure game, which is Lode Runner.
Oh, yes.
That's
Love
exactly
Lode
the
Runner.
context that that's exactly the context I found Lode Runner was. I heard first that it could let you build levels.
Yes.
I was like,
yeah.
Then I'm playing this game. I can build maps. Done. And so it led me to that. That was my introduction to Lode Runner.
So then you grew up, you got older. At what point did you get into actual game development because of this love of level designers?
So I actually started in game development almost 10 years ago. I actually spent a long time working in mobile apps.
Okay.
Of which there wasn't a whole lot of level design, actually, unfortunately. Like, the first 3 years of my professional career were working on mobile games that didn't really have much level content because they were just kind of really basic, farming simulators and social games.
The Facebook games, that sort of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I spent quite a few years doing that. But in the background, I was always working, building Unreal levels, building Doom levels, and that's what enabled me to take kind of the next step in my career. Was really, even though I had worked as a professional developer for 3 or 4 years, the content and the games I created kind of weren't bolstering my portfolio in a great way.
Right.
But on the side, creating Unreal levels and just kind of having this whole showcase where I would tell people, like, I've been building levels for almost 30 years. Some of them you can't play now, but like I've also been keeping up to date, and I'm using modern editors, and being able to show off all that content's got me to where I was able to start working on console games and action-based games, which was always the goal.
And which you are literally still creating levels to this day. Like,
yes.
That's what you do now. For a
It
living,
is.
you create levels.
Yeah, and it is the best. I do really like it. And yeah, to be honest, the tools I've used at different studios are just always much more versatile versions of using those in-game tools. And that's always been my biggest career advice for anyone that asks is you want to get into the industry. Right now, Super Mario Maker is a great tool.
Wow. Yeah,
It's totally viable.
and it's one of those things you never really think of. It's a game, but at the same time, it's empowering a new generation of level designers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
So
Now, before we talk about the future, I just have one question. Sean, we talked about Guacamelee. Did you work on Severed as well, or was it mostly just Guacamelee that you worked on when you were at Drinkbox?
No, I did work on Severed as well in the same kind of capacity as a level designer.
And just for those that don't know, Severed is a Vita game that is doing very well. Has been mentioned that it's an excellent use of the platform, and I hope it does well. I haven't played it yet, I have to admit, but hopefully soon I'll get a chance to try it out. And so, were there similar tools on that to what you had used in Guacamelee in terms of building levels, or is it just such a different kind of game that it required completely different tools?
No, it did. It did use the same tools, and like I said, we all worked in house on it. It just really required a different methodology and a different way of thinking, because of course it's not a platformer,
right?
So it just required a completely different approach to the level design, and I mean, it is a dungeon crawler. So even for anyone who hasn't played it, anyone who's been playing dungeon crawlers for the past 30 years, going back to Might and Magic and any of those kind of first-person dungeon crawler games, most recently like Legend of Grimrock, it's a game about steps. It's a game about taking steps. Yeah. Like, whereas in a platformer, getting from point A to point B, there's pits, there's enemies, there's all kinds of stuff in the way. Like, getting from A to B is the challenge of a platformer. In a dungeon crawler game, there is no challenge because you just push up and you're in the next room. And so every step isn't a challenge in itself. So you have to find different ways to make the game both challenging but also interesting.
So one thing you mentioned when you're talking about designing levels as a child with Wizard is you were playing around with what if you swap these numbers and you made a flying knight? Now that you're doing it professionally, do you also still here's the engine that your developers have created, you're creating the levels. Do you still try to say, well, how far can I push this? Like, hey guys, I want to do this. And do you ever do something like, wait, you're not supposed to be able to do that?
Oh, sure, absolutely. That was the entire purpose of... It was originally released as the DLC chapter for Guacamelee, called El Diablo's Domain, and it eventually became folded into the Super Turbo Championship edition of the game, which is you go down into the underworld, you meet the devil, and he works out of this infernal office tower in the underworld. You have to work your way up his office tower. Yeah. So
are you saying Trump is the devil? I think that's what you're saying.
Oh, don't quote me on it, but I will also not deny it. That's where I'll go. No, but the entire purpose, so you work your way through this bureaucratic hell that we presented, and every room in the tower in this office building is a challenge room. And the challenge rooms were 100% built around that way of thinking. I took everything in the game, and that was designed by me. That entire chapter. And the thinking behind it was we're going to throw the player into familiar-looking scenarios, but the rules are changed in all of them. And so you had one room where you were fighting enemies that had infinite health. You couldn't defeat them. But if you pulled a switch in the room, it made a big wall of spikes come out of the right side. So then you could grab them and throw them into those spikes to kill them.
Or to hold them because they can't die.
Yes, I guess. Yeah, exactly. But you would take care of them. But you didn't have the ability to defeat these enemies you've been fighting the entire game, so you had to find another way around it. And every part of that level plays around with the platforming, with the combat, and flips all the rules. And it's like, yeah, you can normally stand on this kind of thing, but what if this kind of thing is constantly moving? Or what if we just change all those rules? But that methodology... And it was totally evoking the times I played Wizard with helped me design that DLC chapter, 100%.
Yeah, for sure. Now I have to ask then, how many times have you been designing a level and just went out on a tangent and said, "Let me see if I can do this," and then broke the engine?
Oh, that's very, very common. That's absolutely common. That's exactly how you find the extents.
Yeah,
that's exactly how you find the extents of what you can do. Is exactly because. And this goes for the same for computer programming, computer engineering. in my experience with programming, like, yeah, exactly. You never typically set a limit on your value. You just, I'm going to build a function that increments it, whatever, and then you learn, oh no, wait, it goes on forever. Oh no, okay, yeah, okay, no, I better make sure I put limits. And that's the same kind of thing. You always build without limits. You see where it breaks, and that's where your limit is.
That's awesome.
Like, that's part of the process.
Now, just before we talk about the future and a little bit more on what you're doing now, just one more question about the past. Do you have a Commodore 64 today, or do you still play the Wizards somehow through emulation or anything like that? Or when was the last time you played the game?
I have, like I said, part of my research and being nostalgic for it, I have been playing it on an emulator. The Commodore 64 is in my dad's house in New Brunswick.
So you still
And
have
I
it.
think he definitely still has it. And next time I go visit him, I'm going to be fishing it out.
Not if I don't
grab
get
it.
to him first.
Whoa. I think you have enough of them, Sid.
Well, you can never have enough Commodore 64s. That's always been my thinking. I mean, of all the classic computers, I will never turn away another Commodore 64 for sure. You just can't have too many of those. Now, I think I finally figured out, so your new venture is called Household Games, and I think based on the clues between your Twitter and what you've been saying, I think I've finally figured out exactly what you are building. And I'm gonna spoil it for everyone. You're actually building a level editor game.
A level editor game. Nice.
Don't,
right? Level editor.
People aren't going to listen to this, are they? No, I hope they do. No,
have I figured it out? I think I have.
Oh man, I'm going to stay silent on that one. I'll let the Donald Trump comment fly, but not that.
Oh.
I'll stay silent on that. No comment on that.
All right. Can't tell us. Can't deny or confirm level editor construction set.
But I mean, I will say, letting players express themselves in whatever form that is, and that can be, how many games nowadays just let you custom make a character at the very least?
Yeah.
And giving any kind of tools, as small as they are, that let the player express themselves is really important. And I'll say that's important to me, for sure, for everything I'm doing going forward, for sure. There'll be some little thing in there, you'll see.
That's awesome.
And apparently bending the rules, too.
Yes.
You'd like to bend the rules of those level editors.
Absolutely. Well, that's the fun part, is you never know how those rules get bent. So I'm looking forward to putting something out there and then seeing how people can bend those rules. That's definitely part of it. Absolutely. It's my favorite thing about video games.
Awesome. Well, do you want to tell us a bit about your household games then, and just tell people how they can follow you and learn more about what you're doing?
Absolutely, yeah. So just founded this spring. We were founded back in April. We're working on our first title. It's unannounced as of yet. We're looking to make an announcement later on this summer. It definitely will be an action game, because that comes from the pedigree of what I've worked on in the past. Mm-hmm. And we have a really, really strong team. We haven't talked about the game yet, but on Twitter, which you can follow us at HH Games Inc., we haven't been talking about the game yet because we're waiting until we have it just right to show it off, but I've been talking a lot about the team, and it's a really strong, experienced team of people, men and women, who have worked on lots of really great games that people enjoy. Games like came out a couple years ago on PlayStation called Sound Shapes.
Oh, I know that one, yep.
Which in itself is a level editor-based game.
I see a pattern here.
And and we have a really, really great team working on a really, really great game that we'll be talking about, like I said, later on this summer for sure. And
yeah, if you look on the Twitter, you can see some concept art and things like that as well, which looks very cool, actually, I must say. And it does look like you've got the sound programmer from Sound Shapes, so that's kind of an important person on that game, considering what that kind of game is. So that's interesting that you've got that there. And and kudos to you for branching out on your own. That must have been people don't realize how difficult that must be to do. I mean, when you've got to for a lot of people who want to break into the game industry, just working somewhere is fantastic. But branching out on your own is certainly kind of a scary thing to do sometimes. So, good on you for having the courage to do it. I'm sure that's not as easy as some people might think.
It's not. It's a really great experience. I'm loving it so far. But yeah, it absolutely is. I think any entrepreneur lets you know, like always says, that it's equal parts exciting and terrifying at all times, and it absolutely is. It definitely is.
I wish I had the courage to do something like that.
And your blog. So you mentioned the name of your blog. Where do we find that blog? Because the iHeart level design, because that's pretty cool. Or did I get the name?
Yeah. Well, it's iHeart Level Editors.
Sorry. Yeah.
And it can be found at my name, which is Jason Canam, JasonCanam.blogspot.com.
Okay. Perfect.
And I did, like I said, I just typically do some updates. I'm going to be putting some more up very soon for sure. I started writing more, but I may even give you a link to my Commodore 64 post.
Awesome.
Nice. Yeah, I'll definitely want to read that. Did you mention any other Commodore 64 games? Like, obviously, we talked a lot about the Wizard and a few others, but is there anything other than construction type games? Was there any other Commodore 64 game that you just absolutely loved? You mentioned Lode Runner. Was there anything else?
Oh, absolutely. The second one, that's actually a really close second. I'd say the only thing that kept it from being my favorite game was that it didn't have any level editing tools, and that's Trolls and Tribulations.
I don't know that one.
That could be another lost treasure. See,
that's oddly enough,
from one lost treasure to another.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I wrote about it on my blog about Trolls and Tribulations, and how I wrote about the gameplay and how great it is. And the original developer of that, Jimmy Huey, commented in the blog. And he actually said that there's a debug level editor you can access with some debug functions.
Oh,
really?
Yeah, it's in the comment, and I'm like, he did say, I'm reading it, like he said he doesn't remember the key sequence.
Oh no!
But he's like, there is a debug sequence you can enter in the keyboard, and you can unlock the feature to adjust and change the levels.
That's awesome.
But I never got it out of him. Unfortunately, it must like a lot of things from the old age of gaming, nothing was documented.
Yeah.
And many things weren't backed up, so many things do become lost to time.
Maybe we'll disassemble the code and try to figure out the keystrokes.
Oh, man, I would love to be a part of that.
That sounds like a cool project to do. That definitely would fall in line with something the museum should do, so maybe I'll look into that. That'd be a fun project to do for sure.
That sounds amazing.
So, one final question for you. I have to know, did you beat Wizard? Did you get through every level in the game?
I did eventually, yeah. There's 40 levels that are part of the original main package. Oh, but once again, yeah, I didn't play the extended levels that came out in the Ultimate Wizard version, so I guess I haven't played all of it. Actually, I may just look up a version of Ultimate Wizard and try to play through those advanced levels. I heard they got much harder.
Well, can you imagine playing your favorite game now after 30 years and experiencing new levels?
Actually, yeah.
That and making some new levels that we could release, I think, together as a partnership. We'll publish it. You develop the levels. I'll test them. Sean will play them. I think we got a little team here ourselves.
Perfect.
We'll be Household Games, the back shed version. We'll be the back shed.
The garage band.
We won't be in the main household, but we'll be in the back shed, and we'll do levels for extinct platforms. But Jason, if something has ever happened to your Commodore 64, you don't think it's going to come home anytime soon, you let me know. I'll hook you up with a Commodore 64, and we'll put the Wizard onto a disc for you, because, of course, we've got that capability of putting anything onto a disc and giving you that experience again. So you let me know if I can help you get hooked up with a Commodore 64, because emulation is great, but nothing beats the real thing.
Absolutely, 100%. Thank you very much. That is an exciting proposal. That is amazing. I'm all on board with that. I'll be staying in touch with you for sure.
Awesome.
Okay, sounds good.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for joining us for Lost Treasures of Gaming on this very, a twisty way of looking at a lost treasure without the actual developer. But we appreciate you taking the time to speak to us today.
Oh, it was absolutely great. I had a great time. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
And you might not have been an original developer, but I'll tell you, you know as much about the game and give as much of a description as many of the people we've interviewed that have worked on games, because a lot of these games, they've forgotten half of what they've done on the game. So it's nice that your memory seems so fresh on that, which is great. So thank you very much for sharing your experiences and your influences. It's nice to know how a game like that can influence something that people are playing today. And I don't think a lot of people realize that the games that we play today all carry influences with them. And it's nice to know and interesting to know where some of those influences come from. So I know I'll never play Guacamelee again without sort of thinking about the wizard in there.
Right.
Impact it's had on the game. It's true. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, thank you very much, because I loved the opportunity to be able to talk about it. It hasn't happened in a while, and I think it was like I said, I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk about that game.
Awesome.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, guys.
You know, Sid, when you first told me the angle we were taking with this, I thought, what a great angle. But at the same time, I was kind of worried that we wouldn't have enough to talk about or keep it centered on the wizard. And we did.
Yeah.
I mean, Jason
we did, for sure.
His love of that game is evident. And I love how everything he learned from playing with Wizard and creating his own levels in Wizard led to what he's doing today. It's so fascinating.
It is very fascinating, and it just goes to show you how much, games can have an impact on someone when they're younger, and how a lot of these games have had an impact in the games that we play today. So whether you've played Guacamelee or maybe you're trying out the new Severed game on the Vita, you're going to see some influences that come from the Wizard, and so that's really interesting to see. And you maybe had no idea that was there. Not even sure Jason maybe realized how much until he really thought about it, how much those games had influence on him, and it's very evident that that influence is there. And so you just never know. And I think it's really important to look back at these games and see. And for sure, the Wizard is definitely one of those games that perfectly qualifies for a Lost Treasure. It's a game that most people have not heard of.
Right.
And yet at the same time, it's whether you like games that allow you to design your own levels, or whether you just like a good game that's similar to Jumpman. It's not the same, as Jason pointed out, there are some gameplay mechanics that are different. There are some parts that are definitely the same, but if it was the kind of game that you liked, then there's a good chance that you're going to enjoy The Wizard.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I before we close the show here this week, I have to say my favorite story is how he took his love of seeing how far he can push the Wizard engine and twist things in the way they weren't meant to be made, in how he actually created a whole DLC chapter of Guacamelee based on the premise of how far can we push this level editor, and that's awesome.
And it just goes to show you how those influences from the early days, show up in games today. And so if you're always wondering, what were they thinking when they made these levels, now you know. Now you know exactly what Jason was thinking when he worked on that. So
yeah, so awesome. Jason, thank you again. If you're listening, it was a fantastic time speaking to you. Everybody, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Lost Treasures of Gaming. I want to give a shout out to Fred Rojas from Gaming History 101, who helps us each and every week over at the OMG Hour to capture the video of the Lost Treasure that we are doing. And again, if you do miss this show, tune into the OMG Hour, where there is a Lost Treasure every week. Of course, this show can be found on Twitter at Lost Treasures OG, and I am found everywhere as Zion Tane, and that is XianTayne.
And if you're looking for me on Twitter, I'm at Sid Bolton. That's Sid with a Y. And if you're interested in sending us an email, want to tell us how great we are, or maybe you have some ideas for guests for the show, or want to share stories about what games influenced you back when you were younger, please send us an email to losttreasuresofgaming@gmail.com. You can also read the show notes and check out all of our other podcasts in the network at omgnexus.com.
Well, that's it. So be sure to keep us in your podcast catcher, because we'll be back eventually. It may not be weekly, but we are here, always searching. And if you want to know what we're doing next, check out the OMG Hour for a preview of what we might be coming back with next week. Take care, everyone.
See you soon.
This has been an OMGNexus.com production.